She married a monster, but the cowboy heard her crying. There are sounds a person makes when they think no one is listening. Not sobs, not screams, just this quiet, broken kind of crying. The kind that happens with a hand pressed over the mouth, pressed hard, so the walls don't hear it, so the children don't wake up, so the man sleeping in the next room never knows. Clara Whitfield knew that sound better than she knew her own name. She had been making it for 4 years. If you've ever loved a story like this, stay right here with me, because this one is going to take you somewhere warm, somewhere safe, somewhere you didn't know you needed to go. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to your heart, please subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting for you. Now let's go back to where this one begins. Clara was 22 years old when she married Gerald Whitfield. She was young and hopeful, and she believed, the way young women sometimes do, that love alone could hold a life together. Gerald was handsome. He had a firm handshake and a loud laugh, and everyone in Millhaven, Colorado said he was a man going places. What they didn't say, because they didn't know, was where those places would take her. The first year things were fine. Not warm, not tender, but fine. Gerald worked at the bank in town. Clara kept the house, tended the small garden, learned how to cook his meals the way he liked them. She told herself that was enough, that she was building something real. The second year, Gerald started drinking. Not the way most men drink, with their boots off and their voices loose. Gerald drank quietly, and it turned him cold. It turned his words into weapons. He never raised his hand to her, not once, but he had a way of looking at her that made her feel like she was already broken, like she had come to him damaged, and he was simply pointing it out. By the time their daughter Emma was born, Clara had learned to move through the house without making sound. She had learned to agree before he finished speaking. She had learned to measure his mood the moment he walked through the door the way a sailor measures the sky before a storm. Emma was 3 years old and bright as a wildflower, with her mother's soft brown eyes and a laugh that could pull the sun out from behind a cloud. Clara lived for that laugh. She organized her whole life around keeping it safe. But Gerald had no patience for a child's laughter. He had no patience for much of anything by then. One night in early spring, Clara sat on the kitchen floor after Emma had gone to sleep, her back against the cold cabinet, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and she cried. She cried for the girl she used to be. She cried for the life she had imagined. She cried because she was so tired of being afraid in her own home, and because she didn't know how to leave, and because she had nowhere to go even if she did. That was the night she started making a plan. It took her 8 more months. 8 months of saving coins from the grocery money. 8 months of folding dollar bills inside an old tin she kept buried under the rosebush in the yard. 8 months of waiting for the right moment, the right window, the right morning when Gerald left early for a business meeting in Denver and would not be back until evening. She packed one bag. She picked up Emma before the sun came up, still warm and sleepy, and she walked out the front door with her heart hammering so loud she could hear it in her ears. She had $63 and a name on a piece of paper. The name belonged to a woman named Ruth, a distant cousin of her mother's who lived somewhere outside a small town called Caldwell in the Wyoming Territory. Clara had never met Ruth. She had only a letter, old and creased, that her mother had kept for years, with an address scrawled at the bottom in faint pencil. She didn't know if Ruth was still there. She didn't know if anyone was still there. She got on the first stagecoach heading north, and she didn't look back. The road to Caldwell took 2 days and 1 cold night, and Emma slept with her head in Clara's lap and her small fingers wrapped around her mother's wrist. Clara watched the land change outside the window, watched the flat plains give way to rolling hills, and then to open country that felt wide and honest, and nothing like the town she had left behind. She thought, for the first time in years, that maybe she could breathe out here. But when the stagecoach stopped in Caldwell and Clara stepped down onto the dusty street with her single bag and her daughter on her hip, the driver told her that Ruth Hadley had passed away the previous winter. Clara stood still in the middle of that street for a long moment. Emma looked up at her and said, quiet as a church mouse, "Mama?" And Clara said, "It's all right, sweetheart." She said it because she had to say something, because Emma was watching her face and reading it the way all children read their mother's faces, looking for the signal that tells them whether the world is safe or not. Clara made her face say safe. Inside, she had never felt more lost. She spent that first night in a boarding house on the edge of town, counting her remaining coins, trying to think clearly. In the morning, she asked the woman at the front desk if there was any work in Caldwell, any family looking for help, any ranch that might need a cook or a housekeeper or someone willing to do hard work for fair wages and a place to sleep. The woman studied her for a moment. Then she said, "You might try out at the McCade place. Holt McCade. He's got a big spread out on the North Road. His ranch hands left last season and he's been running the place short ever since. Lost his wife 2 years ago. He's got a boy, 7 years old, and from what I hear, he doesn't know the first thing about managing a household anymore." She paused and looked at Clara's bag, then at Emma. "He's not an easy man," she said, "but he's a fair one." Clara thanked her and walked the North Road that same afternoon. The McCade Ranch sat at the end of a long gravel lane lined with cottonwood trees, their new spring leaves pale and trembling in the wind. The house was large and weathered, and clearly built by someone who had meant it to last, with a wide front porch and a stone chimney and flower boxes under the windows that hadn't seen flowers in a long time. Clara stood at the gate with Emma beside her and knocked. The man who opened the door was tall, dark-haired, wide in the shoulder and quiet in the face, with the kind of stillness about him that wasn't coldness exactly, but wasn't warmth either. It was more like distance, like someone who had pulled everything important inside and kept it there, behind a wall no one had ever taught him to open. He looked at Clara. He looked at Emma. He looked at the single bag. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "You're looking for work." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clara said. "Cooking, cleaning, tending to the house, whatever's needed." "I've got a boy," he said. "Daniel. He's 7. He's a good kid, but he needs watching after school hours." "I have a daughter," Clara said. "She's 3. She's quiet and she minds her manners." Emma, right on cue, looked up at the tall man with her wide brown eyes and said, very seriously, "I'm Emma." Something moved behind Holt McCade's expression, just barely, like a curtain shifting in a still room. "I'm Holt," he said. He stepped aside and let them in. The house was clean but cheerless, the kind of clean that happens when things are scrubbed out of obligation rather than love. The curtains were plain. The table was bare. There were no rugs on the floor and no pictures on the walls, and the kitchen smelled of nothing but cold air and old wood. Clara looked around and thought, this house needs a woman in it. Not because she believed a woman's place was the kitchen, but because she could see the shape of grief in every empty corner of that room, and she knew what it looked like. She had lived inside her own version of it long enough. Holt showed her a small room off the kitchen where she and Emma could sleep. Then he showed her where the food was kept, and the linen, and the woodpile. He said very few words, and he said all of them plainly, and when he was done, he said, "Supper's usually at 6. He went back outside. Clara stood in the small room with Emma playing quietly at her feet, and she let out a long, slow breath. It wasn't much. It wasn't anything close to what she had once dreamed of, but it was safe. That was the only word that mattered right now. It was safe, and it was quiet, and no one here was going to make her flinch. That night she made a simple meal, beans and cornbread and a pot of coffee, and set the table for 4. Daniel came in from outside with mud on his boots and straw in his hair, a solemn-faced boy with his father's dark eyes and a way of watching things carefully before he trusted them. He sat down across from Emma without being told to. He looked at the food. Then he looked at Clara and said, "You're the new housekeeper." "Yes," Clara said. "Are you going to stay?" She hesitated just for a moment. "For as long as your father needs me." Daniel considered this. Then he picked up his spoon. "The last one left after 3 weeks," he said. "She said Papa was too quiet." Holt looked up from his plate. The look on his face was not embarrassment exactly, but something close to it. Something human. Clara almost smiled. "I don't mind quiet," she said. Days turned into a week turned into 3. Clara settled into the rhythms of the ranch the way water settles into a riverbed, slowly finding the shape of the place. She baked bread in the mornings while Emma sat on the kitchen floor drawing horses with a stick of charcoal. She washed the curtains and hung them out to dry. She planted seeds in the old flower boxes under the windows. She mended Daniel's shirts and braided Emma's hair and left hot coffee on the porch railing every morning at 5:30, because that was when Holt came in from the barn. He never thanked her, but he always drank every drop. She noticed things about him, the way a person notices things when they are living close to someone and paying attention without meaning to. He was up before dawn every single morning. He worked harder than any man she had ever seen, not because he was being watched, but because it was simply who he was. He checked the fences. He fixed things that were broken before they could get worse. He was the kind of man who did what needed doing and then moved on to the next thing without asking for credit. He was gentle with the horses, gentler than she had expected, and he was patient with Daniel in a way that surprised her. Not talkative, not playful, but steady. The kind of father who showed up, who watched, who made sure, even without words, that his boy knew he was there. One evening, coming in from the garden, Clara heard voices from the barn. She stopped without meaning to. Holt's voice, low and even, Daniel asking him something about the stars, and Holt's answer, slow and careful, the kind of answer a man gives when he wants to get it right. Clara stood outside in the early dark and felt something loosen in her chest. Something she hadn't known was still tied up tight. It was dangerous, that loosening. She knew it. She was in no position to feel anything soft about anyone. She was a woman running from something, and she was living on borrowed safety, and she had a child to protect, and that had to come first, always first. But her heart, stubborn as it was, had started paying attention to Holt McCade. Then the letter came. Clara saw it on the table one morning, a pale envelope with her name on it, forwarded from the boarding house in town. She recognized the handwriting before she even touched it. Gerald had found out where she was. She sat down slowly. Emma was outside playing with Daniel. The house was quiet. She opened the letter with steady hands because she would not allow herself to shake. It was not long. Gerald's letters never were, but every line of it was built to cut, built to remind her what he thought of her, what he said she owed him, what he said he had the legal right to come and collect. He was coming. He didn't say when. He just said he was coming. Clara put the letter down on the table and stared at the window for a long time. That night she could not sleep. She lay in the small, dark room and listened to Emma's breathing beside her and felt the walls of the house around her, which had started to feel like shelter, and she thought about what it meant for them all, for her and Emma, and for the McCades, if Gerald arrived here with his cold eyes and his banker's authority and his claim on her as his wife. She had never told Holt the truth of where she had come from. She hadn't told anyone. Around midnight she got up. She went to the kitchen for water, and she stood at the window looking out at the dark yard and the shape of the barn against the sky, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, and she cried. She cried as quietly as she always had, the old way, the practiced way, the way that leaves no sound but can fill a whole room with sadness if the room is paying attention. The floorboard behind her creaked. She spun around. Holt stood in the kitchen doorway in his boots and shirt, hat in his hand, clearly just come in from a late check on the horses. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her face. He didn't say anything, not right away, but his expression changed in a way she had never seen on a man before. Not pity, not discomfort. Something quieter. Something that looked a lot like understanding. "I didn't mean to wake you," she said quickly. Her voice was mostly steady. "You didn't," he said. He came to the table and sat down. He didn't tell her to sit. He didn't ask her what was wrong. He just set his hat on the table and folded his hands and waited, the same way he waited for everything, patient and still and present. So she told him. She told him about Gerald, about the 4 years, about the way fear had become the wallpaper of her life, always there, always underneath everything. She told him about the morning she left with $63 and her daughter and a name on a piece of paper that turned out to be a grave. She told him about the letter. She told him all of it, and she didn't look at his face while she was talking because she didn't want to see the moment it became too much. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Then Holt said, "He's not coming here." Clara looked at him. His voice was the same as always, low and plain, but there was something underneath it that she had not heard before, something that didn't bend. "You and Emma are safe here," he said. "That won't change." She did not know how to answer that. She had not had many people in her life say things like that and mean them. She had not had many people put themselves between her and something dangerous without wanting something back. She said, You don't have to do that." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I know." He put his hat back on. He told her to get some sleep. He went back out into the dark, and Clara stood in that kitchen with her hand pressed flat against her chest, feeling her own heartbeat. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel alone. Gerald arrived on a Thursday. He rode up the gravel lane on a rented horse in the early afternoon, dressed in his town clothes, with a look on his face like he owned the sky and everything under it. Holt was at the fence line when he saw the rider coming. He came up to the house at a steady walk. He told Clara to take the children inside and stay there. She took Emma and Daniel inside and stood at the kitchen window. She watched Holt walk out to meet Gerald in the yard, unhurried, easy on his feet, the way a man walks when he has decided something and doesn't need to announce it. She couldn't hear the words from inside, but she could see Gerald's posture shift when Holt spoke. She could see Gerald's bluster drain out of him like air from a punctured tire, piece by piece, word by word, until he was just a man standing in a yard feeling small. Holt didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. After a time, Gerald turned his horse around and rode back down the lane. He never came back. Clara didn't ask Holt what he said. He didn't offer to tell her. Some things didn't need to be spoken to be true. Summer came to the McCade Ranch in slow, golden waves. Emma started calling Daniel her brother. Not in a big announcement, just gradually, naturally, the way children decide things, until one day it simply was what he was. Daniel, for his part, started teaching her to ride the small gray pony Holt kept in the south pasture. Holt built a new flower box for the window in Clara's room, wider than the old ones, with carved edges she hadn't asked for. She planted lavender in it. One evening in late August, when the sky was the color of a peach left in the sun, Holt found her sitting on the porch steps watching the children chase fireflies across the yard. He sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then he said, "I'd like you to stay, not as a housekeeper." She looked at him. His jaw was set, and his eyes were on the children, but she could see the effort it was taking him, the way a quiet man scrapes the words together when they matter most. "I know what I am," he said. "I know I'm not easy. I know this life is not simple." He paused. "But I think we're good here together, the four of us." Another pause. "I think we could be something real." Clara looked out at the yard, at Emma laughing, at Daniel catching a firefly in his cupped hands and bending down to show it to her. At the ranch in the soft, fading light, the barn, the cottonwoods, the hills beyond, the wide Wyoming sky going slowly amber above it all. She thought about the woman she had been when she arrived here. $63 and a name that turned out to be a grave. She thought about how far she had come, not in miles, but in the quiet, steady healing of ordinary days. She turned to Holt. "I think so too," she said. He nodded once, slowly, the way he agreed to everything, with his whole quiet weight behind it. And then, after a moment, he reached over and took her hand. He held it the way you hold something you are grateful for, the way you hold something you are not planning to let go. Across the yard, Emma looked up and saw her mother's face, and whatever she saw there made her smile the way only children smile when the world has finally arranged itself into the shape of safe. She ran back across the grass, arms wide, and she climbed up between them on the step and settled in like she had always belonged there. Like that porch, that ranch, that man with his quiet hands was simply where she had been heading all along. Clara put her arm around her daughter. The fireflies came up one by one from the grass. The ranch was still. And in the getting of that stillness, something that had been broken for a very long time finally came to rest. If this story found something in you today, I would love to know about it. Leave a comment below and tell me what part touched your heart the most. Tell me where you're watching from, whether it's a quiet evening in your living room or somewhere else in this wide world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do, because there are so many more stories like this one waiting for you here. Stories of women who were lost and found their way, of cowboys who didn't know they were capable of love until love showed up at their door, of children who healed the hearts of the ones who needed it most. Every story I tell is for you, and I will see you in the next one.